was a lot of connections being made, and we really love to see that here at the Florida Chamber Foundation. That's part of the reason we want to bring everyone together. And so I want to provide some context right now on the current state of Florida's economy, how we're doing, where we're heading, and taking a broader look at how technology and innovation are influencing and driving our economy forward. And so, as a reminder, as I mentioned earlier today, Florida is currently the 16th largest economy in the world. If we were our own country, that's how big we would be. We have a GDP of $1.65 trillion, and that's increased by over $500 billion since we set out that goal in our blueprint of being a top 10 in terms of global economies. And so, high level, our GDP is driven largely by financial services, which account for nearly a quarter of our GDP. Our other two top industry contributors are professional and business services and educational services and healthcare. But where do we stand compared to other states? Well, Florida has the fourth largest GDP in the country. We're only behind California, Texas, and New York. But we've actually had larger GDP growth than almost any other state. With a 43% GDP growth over the past 4 years, that's only second to New York. And if we adjusted for inflation over this same time period, Florida's GDP growth would be number one with a 21% increase. So we've been growing substantially here in Florida, and that's something we're proud of and something that we should all be excited about here in this room. But I want to revisit the 6 pillars that I talked about earlier: talent, supply, and education, innovation and economic development, infrastructure and growth, business climate and competitiveness, civic and governance systems, and quality of life and quality of places. I want to make some connections to those pillars as we consider what our economy looks like and how these pillars intersect with technology and innovation, an intersection that aligns with a lot of what we've been hearing with today from our speakers and what we're going to continue to hear about with an exciting lineup of speakers after I give this economic update. So, starting with our workforce and jobs in Florida. Florida is currently doing well with an unemployment rate of 3.3%, and we've been steady at that rate for the past few months or so, which is below the national unemployment rate of 4.1%. And we actually currently have more open jobs in Florida than we have folks looking for work, which is pretty surprising. But at the state level, for every 100 jobs available, there are only 93 Floridians looking for work. And so this highlights the importance of connecting people with the right job opportunities. And it's important to note that that ratio, it varies county by county, with some counties having more jobs than job seekers and others having fewer. And so that variation, that imbalance, definitely creates unique challenges across the state and in your all's local communities. And so a part of this is ensuring that the skills people are learning align with the jobs that are available now and the jobs that we anticipate we're going to be creating in the future. And so before lunch, we had just heard from the work of Territorium, which is partnering with one of our state colleges to help close that skills gap. And so their efforts are increasing that communication between the workforce and employers to ensure that people are learning the right skills and effectively advertising those to potential employers, folks like you all here in the room. And so this is part of that solution that we're using technology and innovation to be creative of how we're doing things like filling jobs and filling them with the right skilled people in Florida. And so as a whole, Florida's workforce is massive, with nearly 10 million people employed in non-agricultural jobs across the state. And that number's steadily been increasing. In the past year alone, we've added nearly 230,000 jobs here in Florida, which is a 2.4% increase. And as we think about that pillar of innovation and economic development, we're clearly doing well in terms of job creation. And we're on track to keep adding more jobs that are needed for our growing economy by 2030. And in fact, over the past year, we've seen job growth in 7 of our 8 major industries. And many of the speakers here today and that we're going to continue to hear from are directly contributing to this job creation and economic growth in Florida. And one of the ways that this is happening is through new business formations. You know, we have groups like Plug and Play making a statewide impact, and the Age Tech Collaborative helping incubate and grow technology companies that are contributing to our state's growing employment numbers. And, you know, talking about facilitating new businesses, Florida is, in fact, and we're proud of this, #1 in the country for business startups. And we've held that position, that #1 spot, for quite some time. In June of this year alone, Florida had nearly 54,000 new business formations, which is insane. I mean, that's more than California, more than Texas, more than New York. And as we think about our pillars, that business climate that we have, that ecosystem that we've talked about throughout today, is something that really encourages folks to come to Florida to start new businesses and encourages and allows for those businesses to thrive. We're also, you know, it's worth highlighting the diversity that we have in our businesses here in Florida, and that really speaks to our business climate. We're proud of this, and we think we should emphasize the fact that we're #1 and #2 in terms of diversity with businesses here in Florida. Florida ranks #1 in terms of the number of Black-owned businesses, and #2 in terms of the number of Hispanic-owned and women-owned businesses. So we're proud of this diversity, and we aim to hit #1 in all 3 of these metrics. I also, as part of this economic update, want to talk a little bit about Florida's changing demographics. And Florida's projected to grow, as I mentioned earlier, by nearly 2.8 million people by 2030. But that growth is going to be concentrated in 10 already highly populated counties, which will account for over 80% of this population increase in just 10 counties. But some of our smaller counties across Florida are much less populated counties, like Osceola, St. John's, and Walton's. Those are counties that are expected to see substantial growth rates. So some of our smaller counties are going to be growing by a quarter, by a third in size over the next handful of years. And that type of annual growth is significant for any community, but it's particularly significant for smaller communities. And as we plan for this growth, we need to be thinking about the implications for infrastructure, healthcare, and other critical services here in Florida in those communities. So we're going to hear a little bit later today about how technology and innovation are helping us become more efficient in our healthcare services as our population grows. You know, let's think about it. If we have a community growing in size and we're not able to stand up, 5 new hospitals in a community, what are we doing to more efficiently serve patients in those existing hospitals we do have? How can we be using AI and technology in innovative ways to serve and see more patients more quickly and effectively in our medical settings? So we're going to hear a little bit about that later today as well. And Florida's infrastructure development, that's a significant part of our GDP. Our utilities GDP has risen over 40% since 2018. Construction GDP is up 62% since 2018 as well. That construction industry is $94 billion as part of our GDP. And we're doing a lot here in Florida to develop and accommodate our growing infrastructure. But it's crucial that this growth that we're doing is healthy and sustainable. We need to be focusing on opportunities to create a landscape, an ecosystem that supports things like renewable energy, ways that we can keep Florida beautiful. It's something that's not only important for our quality of life, that pillar, that foundation of our game plan, but it's also important for our tourism economy as well. And so we're going to hear, right after this economic update, we're going to hear about some innovative, sustainable energy solutions with our next speaker from FPL. And, we can also think about some of the other infrastructure impacts we're going to have with a growing population and growing interstate trade. With over 15 million truck crossings here in Florida on an annual basis, and that number is steadily rising, we need to consider ways that we're being cost-effective and innovative with our infrastructure to accommodate this growing interstate trade. Later in the day, towards the end of the day, we're going to hear from a panel of folks who are going to discuss autonomous vehicles and talk about the role of autonomous vehicles and trucks in our state. And so, that'll tie into how we're thinking and being planful here in Florida for the future in meaningful ways. I'll very briefly touch on something that, often comes up in the news and comes across folks, headlines and newspapers is our housing market. It's an important area to look at that we track when assessing our economy here in Florida. And it's also important when we think about our rising housing prices for the quality of life here in Florida. Since 2019, we've seen a over 70% increase in the median cost of housing, which is currently just a little bit higher than the national median housing price. But fortunately, however, as we're seeing the number of available housing listings continue to rise, we're hopeful here at the Florida Chamber that those prices will be stabilizing and won't be growing as substantially as they have in the past recent years. And so we think we're entering a new normal in the housing market. But housing affordability, as we think about our economic state here in Florida, it's important that Floridians can afford to live here, have the opportunity to build wealth and stability with home ownership. And it's also important as we think about that growing population and that we're able to attract more folks to move into Florida and help continue to grow our economy, help bring their businesses here to Florida. And remember, we currently have more open jobs than we do unemployed Floridians. So it's an important aspect that kind of plays into this larger picture. But in terms of folks moving to Florida, more people are moving into Florida and bringing their incomes than any other state in the country by far. So Florida's the number one state for income migration at $36.1 billion annually. So every hour, over the course of lunch, we brought in $4 more million of income in terms of that migration. Every hour, 24 days a week, 7 days a week. And these folks are joining our workforce and contributing to our state's economy. More and more folks, we're seeing them come in droves from places like New York, California, and New Jersey. And, in terms of this, there's only been one state to which we've lost income migration, and that's Tennessee. And we are seeing that folks are moving in terms of population. We have lost a net to 14 states in net population, but in terms of income migration. So what we're seeing is folks who are moving into the state are having higher incomes than folks that are moving out of the state. And another important aspect when discussing Florida's economy is our aging population. And so on the one hand, we need to think about how this impacts our workforce. But on the other hand, we need to be thinking about what are we doing here in Florida to accommodate this growing, aging population, this population that's retiring in terms of quality of life and quality of places. And so our population has increased last year as it has, every other year, but we actually had a decrease in our population of working age folks, age 25 to 54 and ages 50 to 59. And our increase in population for the retired aged folks at 65 was actually higher than our increase in that overall working population from ages 25 to 64. And so we're seeing this demographic shift here in Florida that folks should be aware of because it has implications for our workforce, how we make our investments, the types of things that the Age Tech Collaborative is thinking about. We need to ensure that Florida continues to be a place with quality of life for our retirees. And so the innovative solutions that we're seeing in Age Tech, through AARP's Age Tech Collaborative are an important aspect that Florida's trying to be a leader in this regard. And if we can put ourselves at the forefront with that, we can continue to see folks wanting to come here, contribute to our economy, as they move into Florida with that aging population. And as we think about what we're doing in R&D here in Florida, beyond just exclusively, the age tech information, I should mention that, 40% of our business and industry research and development is going towards that professional, scientific, and technical services, those types of things that the Age Tech Collab is doing. And that's $3.4 billion annually in R&D across the state, just in that field. But our private businesses are spending a lot of money and spending a lot of time, $8.4 billion contributing to our GDP in research and development to help ensure that we're moving the ball forward, that we're helping build this ecosystem here in Florida to make it a place where we're going to continue to bring in this research and development funding and continue to have Florida be a leader in this technology space. And so, as I gave you, I threw a whole bunch of economic data at you. I welcome folks to check out both our floridascorecard.org and the floridagapmap.org to look at some of these data points, some of these economic indicators, and think about the connection of technology and innovation in your businesses and your communities. And so in sum, as we think about Florida's economy, it's strong and it's growing. We're an attractive state for folks to move to bring their incomes, to bring their contributions to the GDP. But in order to make this a sustainable ecosystem, it's really the engagement from the leaders that are here in the room today, the folks that are on stage, to help continue to foster this environment. And so I appreciate getting to share this economic update, and I look forward to the second half of our day. And thank you all for sticking around with us, and I hope you have a great rest of your afternoon with us. Thanks so much.